This film reviews what I've done to date so far with this project, adding a room at the back where this covered porch is. And I'm going to run through this series of photographs as quickly as I can so that you are able to come back later and watch this film without it being too long. This first set is just establishing just showing you some of these ceiling heights and hypothetical scenarios. When you see these numbers up here, they're going to refer to a plan. They usually don't matter, but sometimes they might. So this is that if we were just to come out from that existing porch without going to the west at all, you would end up with about a 14'8" ceiling using scissor trusses. These are just here so you can compare these. This is the great room ceiling at the top, not at the bottom of those beams, but at the top of those little beams. And the orange line is the kitchen ceiling height. The blue line is kind of irrelevant, but that's the bedroom ceiling height. So when you build it like that with the scissor trusses, that peak is about 3 foot above the great room ceiling, the top of the great room ceiling. And if it's stick framed like this, then that's another 4 feet above it, and a total height of almost 16 feet inside. As I said at the top, I'm going to try to go through these quickly for the reason I said so then. And so these next ones are more or less irrelevant, but I would have gone through this exercise anyway. This was your original idea. Actually, you wanted to take it all the way to this end, but we would have had some issues with the wall height at that corner. So even if you brought it over that far and figured out another egress path for that bedroom, which you would have to, you would end up with, and this is with a scissor truss, you would end up with about, and this 20 foot is going down 8 inches more, so you would end up with about a 19'4" ceiling with that original kind of plan or concept that you had. And you could bring those scissor trusses down as low as you wanted, of course, at any pitch. But when I began to review it, I looked at several things. And when I began to look at, just to outline some things for you to see, when I pushed this over as far as I could, which meant if I kept this aligned over here, and I think we almost have to, we ended up with 18 foot wide. And then your finished ceiling is, with a scissor truss, is about 15'6". But notice, one of the things to notice when we go from this one that was just here, is the center line of that peak, the center line of that roof, center line of that room is shifted over, really about on the center of this panel is where it comes out to, with this wide version here, which is only about 10 inches off that window. And you start pulling that back a little bit, and you can see how various things change. I wish I had that. You have to deduct 8 inches from this each time. At least it looks like that right now. So this would be 15.2 to the peak. This would be about 14.9 to the peak. Two things. First of all, once we move this, we have this place without brick. So that either is going to get infilled with brick, or all of this brick is going to be taken down and that's going to be treated in some other fashion with any of these plans that go beyond that existing foundation. A couple photos here that just show these options with that center line shifting as well. And this dimension here, you have to deduct 8 inches from it. So this one would be 15.6 from the floor to the peak of a scissor truss ceiling. That's when we're only 10 inches off that wall. So that's really about the highest that we're going to see with this sort of scissor truss arrangement. And it goes up another couple feet if you want to go to actual stick framed roof. But moving back away from bedroom 3's window a little bit more, and this was pretty much what you had indicated to CJ, about a foot, come about a foot over there. Once I finished investigating, so a little later on I refined this some, still didn't correct this height dimension, but I did refine this some and started looking at these various options and how the center line moves. Change the center line to a blue line, And you can see the dimensions over here. When we come over 3'1", about 15.6 to that peak. But if we come to minimum, it looks like to me, it's going to take a 2-foot trench for people to actually lay this block up. So if with a 2-foot trench with that 8-inch block centered in the middle, you end up with kind of a, you can't see it there, this 1 foot is how far this is here. This dimension here ends up being 16 inches. So that's kind of the bare minimum that you can expand that to the left, to the west, with this trench here. So now looking at some of that with from a plan view perspective, this is the existing plan, and this was kind of what the original thought was, that hatched area, and that is 433 square feet if we had kept it aligned with the front of that existing foundation. So I just, from that standpoint, I just rotated that, and that's how I began to build various plans. Well, I really only developed 2 plans with then some variations on the second one of those. But looking at it going in my early investigation, I looked at some of these like this. When I have that same shape, that's 433 square feet, but then when I fill that in there, that's 486. So I started from 433, and then kind of was wondering a little bit about what was going to happen outside and whether anything needed to be planned for as far as that goes, whether any outdoor living and where that was going to go and how large it was going to be, etc. But that was not really part of this, but except for that sort of consideration, what happens if you're coming out the door there. But with regard to these returning, and then these hypothetical floor plan footprints kind of put together before I figured out that we need to come over at least 16 inches here. So A was just coming over there a foot or 1'1" or whatever it was, and we had that 433 feet. And that, to get that 433 square feet, we had to come out 27 feet with that. And as soon as we start moving that over, and I am moving it over in coursing dimensions, 8-inch steps, we start moving that over by coursing dimensions and relabeling, you can see what happens with the length of it. As every 8 inches we go over, we get, in terms of keeping it at 433 square feet, we lose a foot of its length, or we get to deduct a foot of its length. And you can see down at the bottom, these have the dimensions on this width. We started from this kind of bare minimum, which is about 16.4 or so, and then we end up with 16.8. Go another 8 inches to the 2'5", coming out 2'5", which still is leaving 17 inches from that window. So then the final kind of look that I took was D, maintaining that, and D shortened this length to 24. One of the things about shortening the length is the terrain falls off here, so you have a little less block work if you get it this short, if you trim it that whole 3 feet. And you may want it longer than this, you may want more square feet than this regardless. So, but E, which was your original plan, I did because I just do this, I just am curious, could it have been worked out? Was there anything at all that could have been done? And really, I could find no seriously viable path to make it work beyond this, beyond that, as the new maximum. And this is, putting a door into that bedroom, leaving the closet alone, putting a door into that bedroom, and I really don't even know which way you would want to hinge that door. But that gets involved in that, and that would enable you to build this whole thing this wide and then come out, which would get you a little bit wider. I did not go down that road though, because I felt that this was not, I didn't think it was that big of an improvement. So, but looking at those same things, I did want to see how this is looking from looking at the whole footprint of the house standpoint, and not that it's that big a deal. I was just curious to see really how A was going to look in the first place with that 27-foot projection. And it's deeper here, it's another 9 foot here. So that's another 36 foot. And that's a 36 foot altogether projection. Now here's that same 433 square feet, plan A, more or less, plan A. And that's just so you can see kind of what that footprint is overlaid in your places in your house. And then the rest of the footprints is, B as it goes back, 26 foot, 25 foot, 24 foot at D. But since you had indicated the 1 foot coming over, I began, and this was E. This was, I actually showed that footprint. You end up with this 20 by 18. Well, it's actually 22 by 20 square here to work with. And this would probably be given over to closeting or something like that. Anyway, but that was just, I left E completely alone, and I worked from the standpoint of developing A first, because there were a lot of different issues that were going to have to be worked out regardless of which plan was developed further. And there is plan D outlined again. Ignore this bit down here in yellow. Is plan D outlined again, and just briefly what that plan E, that got that ceiling, I finally have this dimension right, that got that ceiling to about 16.9 from the surface, if that were done over there. As I said, I didn't even look at E beyond these couple slides here. Now where the window was. When we get to these outside looks, this is the existing, but from this end we'll be just not having that. This is from this location outside the pole barn, behind the pole barn. So we're just not going to show that in most of them. But where it's not in the way, we'll show them. I don't even show this anywhere. These are the other angles we'll be looking. These are the starting point angles that we'll be looking at. Ignore that. And this one's hardly ever looked at, but it's there. Now, starting with 114A, I did what I could to develop plan A. That's plan A. And these numbers will count up. And I'll try to get through this as quick as I can, but I had to work through all this stuff, and I actually wanted to record it so I knew where I was going. So first I put in the walls, and then actually I came out to 27.4 just because of coursing dimensions, so I pulled that out an extra 4 inches. And that's the first look at a sunroom shape there in the dimensions. And then I knew we're going to convert this to a swing door, out swing door, or in swing door, and relocate this door over here. And if that's an out swing door, that can work. If it's an in swing door, you can see I don't know if I have that table located right, it's sized right, and the chairs are halfway pulled in. So the chairs, that's when someone's sitting at it on this side. So we'd have to go over pretty far to accommodate an in-swing door. 411 to the edge, really. And you can see those dimensions, what it would take to use an in-swing door. Also notice in this one, since this was only coming over that short distance, I actually had them fill this brick in, key that in, and fill that in with brick. And next consideration is whether or not there's going to be a door anywhere on that west side. You can see how the land falls off basically. And I have it located about as far as you could, and either step down to a pad 8 inches or come out on one and then step down to the ground 8 inches. What the next couple slides was, a lot of this is for the builder, a good amount of it is for the builder. These next couple slides, in addition to showing that there, this one also shows pretty much what you would have to step that foundation as you go down to keep it 32 below grade. And that's that side, then you turn the bend and come along. And so the long part where it's the deepest is 7 courses deep. And I might as well cover this right now. Can't really see it here, but you're probably going to have an issue, a coursing issue here, and you can see how it shows up in this pattern where there's a little gap here because we're bringing our course out. It should work out fairly decent, but in some of these photos you'll notice that. But yeah, that's the foundation of the footings then coming around the building, coming this way and going back up. Now I have that door there, and if this slab stays here, and I really think it's better and laid well down the road here in a few more photos, I get rid of that completely just saw that off and bring block across, or something where that's not projecting, so you're not tied to where this door goes. Nevertheless, I designed around that with that centered on that slab as it is. And this is incorrect here because that door comes down and sits, top of that slab. Again, this section is relevant to the builder, but is definitely of interest for how you figure out how we got where we end up with this. But the code is going to require, if we do the easiest, and let's just cover this early too right now. Throughout these plans, I'm just showing 2x4 walls here, and they require R19 now in these walls. So either this is that, and a lot of the walls, well, this will be pretty big, not a lot of windows in this wall, but either these walls have to get spray foamed with closed cell spray foams. They can accomplish R19 in that 3.5 inches, or these walls have to be built out of 2x6 and you lose 2 inches inside the room, so this would go from 1410 to 14.8. And the final solution to accomplish that insulation requirement, and I can double check this, it may be a little different if we call this a thermally isolated sunroom, which means that door would have to be ordered from Anderson, and have a threshold and all that. It couldn't be any kind of an interior door. And I know that was your plan anyway. But the third solution is you lose 1 inch on each side because you have 1 inch of XPS styrofoam on the outside of these walls before the air gap in the brick. So this will go down to 14. It will go down to 14.8. If you build it out of 2x6s, it's going to go down to 14.6. Returning to this next bit, though, this is with regard to what the code requires is braced wall panels. And when you do it the simplest way, it just requires using plywood or using OSB everywhere, no foam, aside from the insulation foam. And that has to be nailed, and that has to be nailed 6 inches on the edges and 12 inches in the field. And if you do it that way, you have to do the whole building that way. You don't have to nail the whole building that way, but you have to nail anywhere it shows a braced wind panel. You have to nail at that 6 inches on the edge and 12 inches in the field. The rest of it you just can nail on however you normally do your OSB, which is close to that anyway. So for a given length of wall, they require so much braced wall panel length per length of wall. And for this length of wall, if it's done in the simplest fashion, it's going to require 52 inches worth of braced wind panel, or braced wall panel. And this is 39 on this side of this door, but the minimum size of those panels has to be 38. So to do it this way, we would have to have a 38 and then another 38 somewhere. So, and I knew that we were going to have issues at this end wall anyway, trying to do anything fairly decent. And this is not a big deal. So you can see when you put the 3'2" on each end, you're kind of limited to this 14.8 in the middle. And you can see it right here is this, and it's related to how high the adjacent opening is. And our door is already 8 feet, and we wanted to add some to that as well. So I'm going to show a different alternative, and it's not that big a deal. It really is a continuous sheeting portal frame, which is and then you can have these as small as 20 inches if you're 10 feet high, and I'm going to figure that we're going to be between 9 and 10 feet high, so it's going to be 19 or 20 inches. It's going to be required for each of those panels. And the detail is just something like this, and I've drawn this before, and it's really just standard. It's just what we'll be doing is this thing here, but we'll have two 2x12s at the very top of that west wall, or that east wall. This is mainly with regard to the east wall. We'll have two 2x12s or two LVLs, however you want to do it, at the top of that wall, and that'll run continuous from the corner to a point north of our last window before the door. And we'll be able to get a lot more glass in there, and it's not that big a deal, as I said, to do that. So if we take those down, now we can start playing around with a little bit more, and it's actually a little bit better than this. This was early, but you can see now if we, because I knew we were going to do something like that anyway at this corner here. So this whole corner is just built out, and the only other thing required besides that nailing is you have to put these metal straps on the inside of the wall here. And when that double 2x12 is laid up in here, the 1/2 inch plywood spacer goes on the inside of the room rather than between the two members. So that's all that's entailed with being able to open this wall up a little bit more. About halfway through the series of 114A slides now, and when we go to this section view and firm up some of our dimensions, it looks like you would build these walls from the slab, from that existing slab, or whatever you do on this edge here, 127 3/4 of an inch to the top of the top plate, and that's the 3 inch for the top plates, and then the 11 1/4, either LVLs or 2x12s here, and that gives you an 11 inch heel height. Now that heel height, that can come down some, and we probably actually, it's not going to be shown through any of this film, but it only occurs to me now, in order to avoid additional bracing work out here associated with this wind bracing, we will definitely raise this to where that is 9 1/4 or less, so we don't have to do that extra work. So almost all these dimensions you'll see in all the feel, you can just visually add 2 inches. These ceiling planes here will come up 2 inches, and these walls will be built at 129 3/4, because otherwise everywhere there's a braced wind panel, which isn't that big a deal I don't suppose, but you need to have full height blocking between these trusses, and then the plywood actually has to go up there too, as I recall. So it's better if we can keep that depressed down to 9 1/4. We still get code required insulation, but that's the minimum to accomplish code required insulation. So next, obviously with that peaked scissor truss ceiling, we're not going to have a hip roof at that end, so that went away. And then the next thing I did is did a bunch of research on these Anderson windows. I was able to figure out what we can use on these transoms up here. And I wasn't sure you wanted to put one above the door, but I'm showing it throughout this film. And the idea with all of these transoms is that they come all the way up to where this 1x6 frieze is. They come, these almost do, these are about 1.5 inches shy of it, but these endeavor to come up where the top of the window frame is hitting the bottom of that 1x6 frieze all along there. And that's what this whole, all this design is going to be built around that. And I started with double hung windows, and I stay with double hung windows, and I'll comment on the very end. But I started with this, where these are the same transom. Even these this is 1'3.5" or so, and this is 1'7", and that was how I had to do it to get these to fit. And this is one of the tallest windows they have. And I have this line in here just to show you. I don't know how tall you guys are, but your eye level is going to be about 3 or 4 inches below your height. So I didn't think either of you are actually 6'4", but I'm showing that there. Okay, so apparently first I endeavored to keep the top of these double hung windows level with the top of the door, the 96-inch door. But I think because I didn't know if I wanted those all the way around the room, so I think for whatever reason I dropped this, so its sill is now at 18 inches from the floor, and I got a taller transom window up here. Now the 72-inch height comes through the center of that upper sash of the double hung window. And from inside, that is like this, and you can see here's what your one in the kitchen's like, and here's how these things are lining up. And so I shortened, I left that transom where it was. I liked the larger transom because of some other things I thought were going to be happening. But I raised the window from 6 foot to 5.5 foot, and that put this point here at 24, which is 2 inches higher than this one. So that would be one of your decision points. And then based on the available window widths, I ranked 4 across here, and these are all equal, 3 foot wide. And out here, that was how that shaped up out here. Now here's another series. I'm not even going to stop. I'm going to keep on going. But I had to build that end wall and build this right hand wall. And this is how I did it. And you can disagree with any of this anywhere along the way. This wall here, if we're going to have the door, well, the windows, we wouldn't do them like that where all that brick's running up there. That would all just be a single unit. And that door, that's shown as an 8-foot door, and I could probably lower it to 7-foot or 7.5-foot door. And Anderson has all them. But maybe the door is not even going to be there. And then we would just add another window across. And we'll be returning to that south wall. But first of all, I did some work on how I was going to align these. If we did it like this, how I was going to line these windows inside. And just doing some shifting around with these braced wind panels and so forth. And when it was said and done, I kind of ended up with that. And so you had these two spaces. This one's, both of them are 14.10 wide. This one's about 12 and this one's about 14.8. Similar on the other side. If, splitting it up by the way those windows are. Now returning to this wall, and I want to say right now, I don't end up satisfied with this end wall, but I did not work with it a lot. I just wanted to get it something accomplished so that we could look at some of the massing outside and some other stuff. We can play around with that wall until the cows come home, as far as getting things accomplished for what needs to happen right away. But looking at that wall, I just began to build what I could. These guys here, Wilbur, Wolford, and somebody else, all W's. This is 5'6", 6'0", and 6'6" on those three people. And I kind of pretty much left the windows alone like that, even though I knew these could be improved upon. I left them at that for now because I wanted to get some other things done. And then I added some of this sculptural type stuff at the ceiling. And these are 8x8 kind of beams, which is probably similar to what you have at your family room up there, or at your great room. But I reduced those to 6 inches wide by 8 inches high, and then I eventually moved them up. And this is how they were ranking on this building. This is how they were interfacing with these windows, these transoms on the west side, where we had to have wider ones at either end to infill that space. But they did work out, and that was just serendipitously the way it worked out, very nearly symmetrical on the door, with the door centered on that old slab. And then we come to some of these outside renderings of this first plan A, the one that comes out 27 feet and is 16'4" wide, I think were the numbers. And one of the things that bothers me throughout this at this end is these are all mulled together, and these could be too, and I didn't endeavor to do that because I knew that could be done. So I didn't go explore that right then. But this end will show some of the stuff inside, and that little arch that's built back into the gable wall at the far end, at the north end, that's not going to be viable. It's just the center line of that room is too strong with that door, I think, for anything like that to ever work up there. So in this particular one, I notice I'm showing that wall all in brick. That's where, this is just this, and this was, whatever that was, 1.5 feet, is filled in with brick and left alone. And maybe that's most of what A does, because it's only, I think, when I go to the next plan, which is pushing this wall over to the left a little bit, plan D, pushing it over as far as we could really, then I take down all of that brick wall and just use regular drywall in there. But these were just looking at some of these ceiling things that I had going, if you can see them, which you can, and how this was finishing. But this is a lot of brickwork, and as I said, there's things that can be done with this end here. To me, I'm fine with this west end, and actually with this end as well. It's just that end wall here that to me needs some work, or could use some work. So that was how that plan shaped up then, with these, if these beams were used through here, if these false beams were used through here, just drywall beams, similar to what's in the family or in the great room. That is how that shapes up. And so the only other thing I did then was that bigger plan, that one of the largest plans, which was moving us out as far as we could, 3'1", where we're only 9.5 inches off that bedroom window. And these plans, this does not go on as long as the last series, because all the problems were already kind of figured out. Now notice though, on this wall, this is where I took down all that brick I just mentioned, and this is just built as a double wall. It has to be. That's built as a double wall, and you have this extra space here. You could use that for whatever you'd like to use it for. But looking at that as a secret passage, one of the things, it is a shorter trip to this restroom than that one through that secret passage. So I just thought that was worth mentioning. One other thing you might want to notice, I don't show it here. So here, if you had two ceiling fans in Plan A, presumably you would have them at the intersection of these ones here. You would have one centered at the intersection, so two windows on this side and two windows on this side, and the other ceiling fan would be centered on the door itself. And I had put them in here, and this is with that shorter plan, the one that's only 24'4" deep. So in this other one, goes there and here. In terms of skylights, in this, because I just don't want to be remiss and they need to be mentioned, in this plan here where we have this 4 ranking down here, it looks to me like you would either have to do 2 skylights here and whatever else you wanted to do anywhere else. But if you're going to do any skylights on this east side, I wouldn't put them on the west, just because of the heat gain, unless you want to get them with the shading and all that. But this does set up for skylighting if you wanted between some of these rankings. I think it works out better with this one, because then you could just have it, if you wanted them, you could have, 1, 2, and then optionally 3 and 4. But I just don't want to leave that out. I did want to mention that. So here's a quick look of that from this wider room, from this Plan D. I guess that's the same. This is the same thing. It's just where I was looking at different things on this ceiling and on that roof. And so these are what this 3 rank plan, the shorter 24-foot length plan, looks like, where these go from 4 ranks to 3 at that location. Of course, that brick doesn't run all the way up. We're going to treat that differently. It's a little early. This is more how that would be, and this is where I was saying that this would have to be done similarly, because there's just too much of a fight between it, particularly with this here. And I also mentioned this right here too. If I was going to do something different, I show a couple shots of casement windows down through here, but if I was going to change anything, I would make these bottom ones just like this, but transom units, or yeah, little awning windows that could open up for the ventilation, and then I would have this center one as fixed glass. So all these top 6 would be fixed, and these would be the ventilators here. I mean, those you can, but you can't hardly reach them to open them. But I did want to mention that as well. And then you could see where I said, that slab should just be cut off flush with this, or where it should be cut off, and then that infilled with block or whatever. And this is just showing some of those different ceiling treatments in this wider room. I didn't mention it, but the other thing that happened when we went from Plan A to Plan D was that center window with the arch got wider. It went from 63 inches wide to 71 inches wide. And the side windows stayed at 3 feet for now, but I was going to look at that whole end further. And then finally, this is a different, so if that's too much brickwork, particularly at this end here, an alternative is to just use some siding and brick. I try to get these to look better. I kind of like this look here, particularly if it can save some money on all that brickwork. And hopefully you're able to find matching brick with the right, it's at different size than typical. I think it's 3 inches high. That's why they're able to do this sill like this. But that was it. So we basically had A and D, A being the skinny one, and D being that this one here. But with this is D2 with the siding instead of the brickwork. I actually pulled that gable end soffit back some with that siding running up instead of the brick. And I think now there's just some films that are going to run that will show this particular plan, D, from overhead, just to see how it interfaces with the rest of that first floor. And I think that's about it. It's been fun, so I'm going to get that done and get this over to you. Thanks a lot. I'll talk to you soon. Going in, I wasn't sure if you were going to use the same material in that room or whether you're going to change it to a tile type look, even though I knew it was going to be luxury vinyl of some type. But if it is going to be a departure from everything else that's in the first floor, then definitely let me know and I can definitely show it to you. Just a couple of last minute thoughts with regard to this little area here. This wall between the nook in the new room and that passage, if it's a passage. It applies either way, really. And what it is, recall we built this double wall. Once we take that brick down, we have to build a double wall so that the inside's maintained where it is, and the outside we're able to cover up whatever's left of the foundation once we take the brick down to the top of that existing slab. And so a couple things with regard to that double wall. First, door, whether it's to the passage or to the closet, to a closet, can be a pocket door. It can slide back in that side, on that left side of the double doors. And then secondly, and really this is just so that I'm not remiss with regard to it, because that wall space is probably available depending if there's any wires in there now going up to create, a recess for art or something like this. Going at full depth, 3.5 inches deep on the kitchen side or on the nook side, and it could be on either side or it could be a little less depth on both sides. But I did want to mention that as well because of that double wall. And I'm going to close this film now, finishing the end before I start the beginning, and leave you with these photos of that same wall. And it's been immensely fun, as it always is, and you have a myriad of decision points. But let me know, have fun, and thank you. Actually, sorry, one last scrap, and I just was curious about this, so I put this little series together, and so I may as well show it to you. But I was curious how the sun would enter that room through the day. So if you set up the latitude and longitude correctly and your north direction correctly, this is apparently an accurate representation of that. And so this was, and I just did this on September 21st when the sun would be at its lowest angle. September 21st through the day. So this is around 8 a.m. and then it just goes through the day, and this is how the sun is moving across this room. See, midday, none of this can even come in all the way into the deep room. And finally these western lights start showing up here, and by about 8 o'clock it's the end of the day. That's it, promise. Thanks.